Hello, Tony Atwood here, and we're going to focus on the interplay between stress and autism. From extensive clinical experience, stress and autism seem to go together so often, but the question is why? And that's what we're going to explore here. Now, there are certain reasons why there's high levels of stress. Now, the first is the area of genetics and neurology. Now, we've known for a long time that in autism there can be a family history of anxiety and depression. So you may have inherited a predisposition to stress, anxiety and depression. So we also look at the neurology, and a part of the brain called the amygdala, deep within the brain, that's associated with both the recognition and regulation of emotions, especially anxiety. Now, researchers confirmed that the amygdala in autism is structurally and functionally unusual for autistic children and adults. What does this mean in everyday life? Well, there's a tendency to overreact, to quickly catastrophize and push the panic button. It is the immediate intensity of the emotion that can be very difficult to know how to cope with. Now, when we look at the amygdala and autism, there are also lack of connections, neural connections between the amygdala and the frontal lobes, the thinking part of the brain. Now, the amygdala says danger, threat, anger, whatever the emotion may be, and it's usually the frontal lobes that will then say, okay, I'm going to cognitively and maturely deal with this. But there can be a lack of information. Now, Michelle and I have developed a metaphor which we think will explain this fairly succinctly, of a vehicle being driven on a highway. Now, the frontal lobes are the driver, deciding where to go, who makes the executive decisions of the journey. Now, what the amygdala does is become the dashboard of the car that gives you warning signals as you're driving. For example, the temperature of the engine, that is imminent meltdown on its way. Engine revs and speed, that is emotion and thought acceleration that's occurring, and fuel in terms of energy levels. So these are the important components. So in autism there may be a faulty dashboard and lack of information for the driver, frontal lobes, on stress levels. Now, there are new concepts being developed in autism, and one of the new concepts are interoception and alexithymia. Now, interoception is not being cognitively, frontal lobe, aware of increasing levels of stress, anxiety, anger and sadness within the body until they're very intense. It's almost as though those feelings are rising, but you're not cognitively aware of it till it reaches a level that is very difficult to manage and express. And that leads into alexithymia, and that's the ability to express your thoughts and feelings in speech. Now, typical adults are aware of their emotional state very early on and are able to convert their thoughts and feelings into speech and articulate and disclose very effectively how they're feeling. In autism, that's a genuine difficulty. When somebody says, how are you feeling? And you may say, I don't know. You're not being difficult. There is a genuine problem in terms of converting thought and emotion to speech. Now, there are other reasons that there can be problems with stress and autism, not just those intense emotions that seem to just jump out and grab you, but there can be other dimensions such as sensory sensitivity. Now, in this program, we will be going through sensory sensitivity in more detail, but sensory sensitivity is a factor in increasing stress levels. It's an environmental reason, not to do with the body and neurology. It's to do with auditory sensitivity, people shouting, machinery and things like that. It can be aromas, people's perfumes, deodorants and things like that may make you want to vomit. Unfortunately, it's just overpowering. Or the lunch that they have in their lunchbox, you go, oh, I can't stand that. It can be tactile, and that is touch. It can be protective clothing or wearing a tie, or even sometimes the forms of touch in greetings that will occur, or conversations, that light touch that people will use so often. But it can also be visual sensitivity of lighting, glare, color combinations. And what neurotypicals often don't seem to recognize is the sensory world in autism is in an intensity that is very, very difficult to cope with. So in stress, we look at sensory components as well. There's another cause of stress, and that's social. And that's reading non-verbal communication. By definition, those with autism have difficulty reading facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and social contextual cues that others use no energy to process and understand and know how to respond. In autism, the person may be able to read and respond, but it takes a lot of learning and intellectual effort and leads to a lot of stress, particularly performance anxiety and stress, and ruminating on how well did I do socially. So in reading the facial expressions, it can be achieved by intellectual analysis rather than intuition, which is absolutely exhausting. So at the end of the day of work, you go, oh, it wasn't just the work, it was the social, it was the lunch break, it was the repartee, the team rapport that was going on. I could do it, I was there, but I am more exhausted by the social side of work than the actual performance side for the work product. But there's another dimension of autism which we're only just starting to explore further, and that's empathic attunement. It's a sixth sense perception and reaction to someone's negative emotions, such as someone else's anxiety, disappointment, and agitation. A moment ago, I mentioned it's difficult to read the non-verbal cues in a person's face and so on. However, those with autism can be incredibly in tune with negative emotions in others, that empathic attunement. These are some quotes from some adults who have described that. Quote, "There's a kind of instant subconscious reaction to the emotional states of other people that I've understood better in myself over the years. If someone approaches me for a conversation and they are full of worry, fear, or anger, I find myself suddenly in the same state of emotions. And it seems that other people's negative emotions are contagious for autistic adults. At the moment, we're going through the process of COVID-19, of picking up a virus. This is picking up an emotion virus that becomes an infection. But the trouble is in autism that once you are infected by someone else's mood, you have great difficulty finding a cure. We don't have a vaccine that will make you impervious to emotions in others. And the anticipation of potential infection can increase stress levels. Now, another cause of stress in autism is thinking style. And again, we'll be going through this in much more detail in the program itself. Now, in autism, there's a different way of perceiving, thinking, learning, and relating. A different way of perceiving things that nobody else would notice, but also the sensory. Thinking outside the box in a different way, which at work can be very valuable. And a different way of learning on the job by visual learning and experience, but also a different way of relating. Now, the thinking style associated with autism has qualities such as perceiving patterns and systems and errors, and you may be employed because you spot the mistake and you fix it. However, there can be anxiety and stress regarding errors. You spot the errors and a determination for perfection, sometimes beyond that of your line manager's expectations. There can also be rigid or inflexible thinking, a one-track mind that's very good. Once you're on that track, you are going to do that. But if someone says that you have to do something different or take a pause on this before you've had closure, that can cause you stress. And there's an insistence on sameness and routine and difficulty coping with change and new schedule or expectations and having to create an internal representation of a new plan. When we look at stress and autism, what we find is that stress can actually lead to an increase in the signs of autism. Some of the signs of autism are coping mechanisms, and if you are stressed and finding difficulty coping, then the signs of autism may be greater. Now, that can be, for example, seeking social isolation to reduce being overwhelmed by social and sensory demands. Repetitive behaviors and routines are a means of self-soothing. And insistence on sameness, another component of the diagnostic criteria, to prevent uncertainty. Escaping into thoughts about the special interests act as a thought blocker for stressful thoughts and experiences. So under stress, autism may become more conspicuous. Also, failing attempts to reduce stress may lead to frustration, which is expressed as anger. And needing to reduce uncertainty and chaos can lead to acting as a rule policeman to restore order. I need everything to be just so. I can't deal with anything that is off script. And when it does occur, I want to go back to the script as soon as I can. Now, we also look for triggers for stress and anxiety in the workplace. And these are some of the areas that Michelle and I have identified. Disruptions to established routines. The person with autism can be famous for enjoying routine and predictability and not being bored by it, but when there's a disruption, can be very agitated. Being expected to behave in a certain way, but not knowing how. Nobody's giving you the script of what to say and do, and the social demands in that situation. Also, being prevented from carrying out certain expected activities or routines. I must have closure. And instances when there are too many demands, choices and expectations, just overwhelmed by too much and what's the right thing to do. But also the experience of social conventions and work rules and policing those rules, which may be annoying to others, and policies being broken. That's the policy, that's what we're supposed to do, and very upset when that occurs. It's having a change imposed when you're not ready for it, having to wait or hurry up because of the demands of the workplace, fear of making a mistake and the work is not being perfect to your standards, being considered stupid or incompetent by work colleagues or the line manager, major source of stress and vulnerability, and making a literal interpretation of a comment, such as, you must always do your best. Always? Is there no alternative? So please, just take a moment or two to reflect on the sources of stress from your own work experience.